Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and today it is the 29th of September, and today we do have a lot of news, so I will get into all of that, starting of course from Kherson, but I will begin by talking about a lot of the strikes that have occurred either from the Air Force or from the Shahed 136 drones. So in Mykolaiv we had a reported strike probably by Shahed 136s, although we are not exactly sure. Then the same thing occurred in Odessa. We had explosions reported in here, and actually, the general staff of the Ukrainian armed forces said that they had shot down 5 Shaheds over the Black Sea. So it's possible that those explosions were of the drones getting shot down, although we don't exactly know. Now, we also had some strikes using the Shaheds on Nikopol over here, which is another one of those towns which is very close to an air radar used for shelling of said town. And also, interestingly, Dnipro, where there was a lot of damage reported, and you had like a lot of windows shattering around warehouses that were targeted. So there were some strikes over here. And then another place that was mentioned, I'm not exactly sure if it was destroyed or if it was partially damaged, but just another target that was mentioned is this train station over here, the Sinelnikovo train hub, which is pretty close to Dnipro. So there is some coordination between the supply hubs in Dnipro and the one that I'm talking about. And it gets from here to Donbass and whatever part of the front line wherever it's needed. So this is a pretty good target, and if it were to go out of operation, that would sort of disrupt the logistics for Ukraine. So if it hasn't been destroyed already, it probably will. There will be more attempts by the Shaheeds to destroy this. It's only about like 50 miles away, so it is in the range of long range shelling and of the Tornado MLRS systems. But let's talk now about Kherson for a second, about the Andrivka bridgehead, which seems to be falling apart at this point. You have some troop rotation in order to prevent a total collapse of the front lines. So the 99th, 100th, and 101st battalions of the 61st Brigade will be sent into the front line, specifically around Blahodativka, Andrivka, Lozove over here, Bielhirka, and Novo Hrednijevo. And you're seeing that a lot of these other towns over here are actually falling back into Russian hands as Ukraine starts to withdraw due to the heavy Russian strikes in this area. It was even reported that Ukraine started shelling Bizhimine and Kostromka, which does prove that those two are under Russian control at the moment. So it does seem as if they are starting to prepare for the worst, because you have the 24th Sappers Brigade starting to build fortifications around Ternivka, Veliki Artikov, Bila Krenitsia to prepare for the withdrawal of the Ukrainians and prevent any sort of Russian crossing of the river over here, because you do have pontoon bridges specifically around Ternivka, which is being used right now to supply the Ukrainians and send over reinforcements. So you're seeing a lot of reinforcements from the 28th Brigade specifically, and the 46th Brigade. They're getting a lot of new equipment right now, specifically M777s and roving guns. They're being sent to the front line around Ternivka and Bielohirka. And specifically the 57th Infantry Brigade, which was also stationed in this area, they suffered some heavy losses due to Russian airstrikes around Suki Stavak and previously Kostromka and some of these other minor towns. So they were actually taken out of the fighting, and they will be replenished as time goes on, but for now, they're not actually fighting anymore. So they're being replaced by some reinforcements. But one last thing to mention about this bridgehead is that there was actually a strike on an ammo depot using the S-300 systems, and they were actually used this time not as air defense, but actually as missiles to destroy targets on the ground. So here you have the geolocation, and warehouse is over here. The equipment is from Odessa in western Ukraine, and it will not come to the front line now. So this town over here, Berej Nehuvate, is one of the key towns being used to supply the Andrivka bridgehead. So you will see more strikes of this area in order to disrupt the supply lines. But all in all, that's really it in terms of strikes and actual fighting in the Kherson region. So I'm going to move on now to what's going on in the Donetsk region right before we go on to the main sector of the fighting. So I did add a geolocation over here. It was based on a video posted by the Russian sources of the DPR troops storming Mayorsk, which does also imply that it is contested. So I was wrong about this. I had it marked as red, but it is still black, meaning it's in the gray zone. You see, this is just one of the several targets in the video. This is the one that was closest to the Russian front line, so I put the marker over here. So you have DPR troops using their man pads, destroying some of the houses over here, or you probably have Ukrainian troops stored, and it's sort of like an urban type settlement where there are a lot of apartment buildings, very tightly packed, which does complicate things and it makes it very difficult to take over. It is possible that by now the train station is under their control, but this residential area is still under Ukrainian control per the videos, although they might be a bit old. And you see a lot of the manpads being fired from the trench positions over here. You can see as I zoom in that they're clearly visible. So they have been there for a while, probably since the beginning of the Donbass conflict. And it is a very good firing position onto the areas that Ukraine is entrenched in Mayorsk. So that sort of explains why Russia wasn't advancing in the south, because had they actually controlled Mayorsk, they probably would have already went towards Orzaryanivka. So that will have to happen in the future once they take Mayorsk. In Bakhmut, there was a pretty vague report from the Russian media, which was actually on the ground, and they were doing an on-the-ground report. And as they were talking, it seems as if there was a thermobaric weapons, a thermobaric strike launched by the TOS-1A complex. So it seems as if there were some heavy strikes on Bakhmut tonight and throughout the day. But a general offensive in this area is unlikely. It's just going to be the same continued fighting with the Wagner troops just trying to break through. And they have made some minor gains, and they might be able to capitalize on that as Ukraine starts to move their heavy equipment away from the eastern part of Bakhmut, which will be difficult due to all the roads being destroyed. And they did this themselves. They blew them up. So the only way to really get the heavy equipment across would be to A, do it from the south, which would be subjected to heavy fire from the Russians, or B, do it through like Pitarodny, for instance, which would also be risky, but to a lesser extent. But again, no real changes in this area. Now let's go on to the most important sector of the fighting, where we have Russian Telegram channels. They reported on heavy Ukrainian assaults in the direction of Yampil and Torske. So clearly these two haven't fallen yet, but they are being not necessarily contested, but rapidly approached by the Ukrainian mechanized brigades, which have a head start as they are mobile units and they're going pretty quickly. They really don't have to worry about being flanked because of a lack of Russian soldiers. They're also approaching Dibrova and Kremina, as I've talked about for a while now. And they're beginning to actually shell the highway which spans from Kremina to Svatove. And they're using actually a lot of M777s and the HIMARS to strike the highway, which is going to inevitably disrupt the supply lines between the LPR and the front lines, which is difficult given the fact that you need to supply the garrisons in Lyman with equipment, and that's already very difficult in the current circumstances. So I did make a few changes to the map since yesterday, but not that much. So first of all, Bilohorivka and Ivanivka are fully under Ukrainian control at the moment, and this is even backed up by the military maps website, which is pro Russia, and they have a pretty good understanding of what's going on the front lines. So if they're marking it as under Ukrainian control, then it most likely is by now. But the Ukrainians were feeling very ambitious today, and so they sent the recon unit all the way south to Zarichny. But this was a bridge too far, and they were pushed back by the LPR soldiers. So now the front line is around here. There are some conflicting reports as to whether Ukraine has actually reached the road between Yampil and Drobysheve. Some sources are saying that yes, Ukraine has actually reached this road over here and that they are very close to Stavky. And some are saying that Russia is still holding the line further north. So I have no idea. I hope we get further elaboration on this by tomorrow. But anyway, one other update that I have is that Chandri Holove is fully under the Ukrainian control. And the unit that probably was responsible, I'm not sure if it is, but given the fact that they were operating in Novoselivka, it does make sense. It would be the 81st Air Mobile Brigade. They filmed themselves in front of Novoselivka, so it is entirely possible that they pushed from the south towards Chandri-Holove. So now the goal is, of course, to take over Darilove, which is possible. I would say a interesting strategy that Ukraine could do is say they push through the defensive line around Drobysheve and take over the remnants of the town. And then from there, they link up with the Ukrainian garrison, whether it be the 25th Airborne Regiment, which is around Yatskivka, and since then they've probably pushed deeper into Russian territory. So they can link up with them for that, and they're around Kolodiazi right now, and actually isolate whatever Russian troops are in Darilove. And the unit that's in Darilove, I think it's the Bars 16 unit, not the 13 unit. And this is just one of those reserve units, so it's not the best. But nonetheless, even though they've been numerically inferior, they've actually been holding out for a while now. And although they have given up land, they are still holding on to the same general line despite the threats of being encircled. And you could say the same thing about the Bars 13 unit in Lyman. Despite the assaults which have occurred today from three directions, the south, it was the 66th and 79th Airborne units attacking Lyman. They were unable to make much of any gains. Then, of course, you have the assaults from the forested area around Drobysheve. And then also you have the assaults which were coming in the direction of Kolodiazi. But those were not fruitful as well. So Lyman is holding on at the moment, but the question is how long can it hold on, especially as the situation deteriorates with towns falling around every single day. Several towns are falling to the Ukrainian control, but Lyman itself is still holding strong. In terms of reinforcements, we haven't really gotten much news about this, which is pretty interesting. But it seems as if you just have the Bars 13 unit in Lyman in addition to the 20th Guards Rifle Brigade, or maybe it's an army, one of the two. But you do have the 20th Guards in there, so they are heavily fortifying the city right now. There's no indication that they are preparing to withdraw, and so we're gonna have to wait and see what happens here. But I want to move on to some of the other parts of the front line right now. I did adjust the situation around Pisky Radkivsky. This is probably the most likely scenario at the moment. You have Nizhche Solone and Vizhche Solone. Both of them are under Russian control. Then there's a bit of a gray zone over here. Izyumske, Ohivka, and Druzel Neither of those are under any side's control at the moment. So there's just some recon units operating in this area, but no firm control. In terms of the situation around Kupiansk, we don't have a clear view, but I did make some minor adjustments, just that Podoli is under Ukrainian control, and again, you have the 92nd Mechanized Brigade in this area operating for Ukraine, pushing further south from Kiev Sharifka and also the Kraken Battalion. They're more so of a recon unit, so I'm sure that right now they're trying to like push further into this highway towards Kislivka. Now, last thing is the situation around the Dvorichny bridgehead, and I don't really have anything to report on over here. The situation has remained the same as yesterday. So the last thing I want to talk about before ending the video is the fact that there is some big news tomorrow, and that is Putin. He will be signing the edict on incorporation of both Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. So that's going to happen at 3 p.m. Moscow time, which is 8 a.m. for me. And it will be held at the Hall of St. George in the Kremlin. So that's going to be a pretty interesting event. So he's supposed to give a pretty voluminous speech. So do look out for whatever he says in there. It might be interesting. And until the time of this ceremony, all four of these regions will actually be considered independent republics under Russian law. So it's sort of similar how to Crimea, how Crimea in 2014 they were actually independent for 24 hours before joining Russia. So basically the same thing's going to happen now in Kherson and Zaporizhia. They're going to be legally considered independent until 3 p.m. Moscow time. So that's really it for now. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.